Welcome to Are you sure about that? I'm Christopher Armitage, and I am here with the incredible human genius powerhouse known as Sarah Smith.
Hi, it's nice to be back. Yay.
Sarah, it's been so long. It feels like an eternity.
An
Thank you
eternity,
for coming.
truly. Of
Yeah,
course.
thank you.
Thank
What are you
you.
going to tell me about today?
What do you know about Stoicism?
Okay, I'm big fan. Marcus Aurelius, Seneca.
All the
Uh,
Senecas, all of them.
on there's the book On Anger by one of the Senecas. I can't remember which. Seneca was like the John Smith of names of
Yeah,
its day.
it was John Doe.
Yeah, yeah. There's a lot of focus on taking care of your inner world and managing your reactions to things. And also that tech bros and venture capitalists freaking love it, dude.
Yeah, they love
Yeah,
it wrong. The gym bros
I
love it
love it
wrong.
wrong.
All of these people are like, it's been completely misinterpreted as to be stoic is to not feel anything, suppress your feelings. And so I'm here to give folks an idea of what Stoicism actually is. I'm going to give a little bit of history about it, and then I want to talk a little bit more about what it actually means and what it is to be a Stoic. So Stoicism is actually it's an ancient Greek and Roman philosophy. It was really popular during the Hellenistic and Roman imperial periods. So Stoicism was founded in the ancient Agora of Athens. It's like the big shopping plaza community center place by Zeno of Citium around 300 BCE for our understanding of its evolution. It really flourished in the Greco-Roman world until about the 3rd century CE. So Stoicism actually emerged originally from Cynicism. The Cynic tradition was pretty popular, and then Stoicism just kind of caught fire because it was like an evolution of Cynicism, and it got popularized through public teaching at the Stoa Poikile, which is like a big painted colonnade. So Stoicism, Poikile. So that is kind of how it got its idea. And you were exactly right. Marcus Aurelius, I think, is probably the most famous practitioner of Stoicism. So the Stoics themselves, they actually developed, it's called a propositional logic. So it's one of two dominating schools of logical thinking throughout the classical world. Aristotelian logic, term logic. Aristotelian term logic is the second, and Stoic propositional logic. And that is super confusing and feels really pedantic to say. So I'm going to give a little bit of what that actually means because that's a lot of confusing things. So it was largely built and shaped by, his name was Chrysippus. He was the third head of the Stoic school in the 3rd century BCE. So Chrysippus's logic differed from Aristotelian term logic because term logic is based on words, whereas propositional logic is based on propositions. Propositions are the meanings of declarative sentences, objects of beliefs, and bearers of truth values. So when you say a sentence like, it is gray out, that's a propositional declarative sentence. And that is what the Stoics really focused on, was dissecting those sentences. Does that make sense?
That does make sense. That's really interesting. Some of the early examples of human beings exploring truth value or reality value.
Oh yeah, like our this whole like pedantry and semantics of language, this is not new. We did not invent that. The internet did not invent that. I actually think if you really want to think about it, the internet has become the agora where this kind of stuff gets discussed, where these breakdowns of logic and logistician and logistical words, this is where that happens now. And I think it's really cool. This is not new. This is not a new concept. We just used to do it in togas and in person.
And then we do it on 4chan.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
exactly. It's almost like it died for a little while and then came back.
Yeah.
If you wanted to experience it before the internet, you had to do it at a college campus. And now we have the internet where we can all participate in the conversation all at once, loudly and wrongly.
Yeah, the algorithms are weighing in, but I do think you're right. I mean, there's a lot of incredible places on the internet. You end up in the right forum or Reddit community, and people are having incredibly well-cited and sourced conversations about the nature of being and reality.
Yep, it's never ended. And
Yeah.
so Stoicism itself started to decline after Christianity became state religion in Italy and Greece at around the 4th century CE, so not BCE, CE. So it was around for a really long time. But the influence of Stoicism extended to Roman thinkers like Seneca, all of the Senecas. Epictetus is another one, and it later influenced Christianity and the Renaissance Neo-Stoicism movement, which were two other big philosophical intellectual movements. So it did actually influence Christianity as well. Currently, our modern interpretations of Stoicism, they're super watered down and misinterpreted, and they're also misunderstood as feel nothing, totally isolate yourself. And you see this, like I mentioned earlier, in gym bro culture. We talked in another episode about iron pill culture, and this is a really big foundation for them, but it's a gross misunderstanding of Stoicism. And a lot of these young men, they turn to it as a way to define masculinity or manhood, but they're doing it wrong. Let me be totally honest. I consider myself someone who integrates Stoicism into my life. So I actually use philosophy in my life. And a lot of modern therapy, which I'll get to in a little bit later, also uses Stoic principles as beliefs, as practices in order to help people navigate emotions. So it's actually the complete opposite. It is not about feeling nothing, it is about feeling everything. And I want to talk about what it actually means to be Stoic in your logic and philosophy.
Yeah, it's really interesting because you have these gym bro tech dudes out there, and they're like, "Look, you gotta grind 100 hours a week so you can get ahead." It's not stoicism.
There was no rise and grind for Marcus Aurelius. He was like, rise
No,
and do exactly whatever I want to do.
definitely, definitely.
The Stoics believed that the universe operated according to reason or logic. It was referred to as logos. To the Stoics, logic was actually a wide field of knowledge, and it included the study of language and grammar and rhetoric and epistemology. So philosophy was not just about logic and reason, it was actually about how we use our words and how we construct our sentences. We have been deconstructing sentences for centuries. And the misunderstanding really comes from this belief that logic and emotion exist completely separately in Stoic philosophy, which is absolutely not true. Emotion and logic do not exist in separation in actual Stoic philosophy. The Stoic commitment to logic does not mean logic at the expense of emotion. It means logically interpreting emotion. And I think that is the big misstep people make. It is not about screw emotions forever, only logic. It's about logically looking at your emotions. It validates them and thinks them through. So Stoic ethics, they center on virtue as the highest good, right? Cultivating emotional self-control. And this is a calm, problem solving state of mind and using rational judgment to create lifelong flourishing. And they called this flourishing state their flow state. Ancient Greek flow state was called eudaimonia. And the core here, the big core of this is emotional self control, not emotional denial. And that is the critical misinterpretation that modern Jim Bro manosphere guys are ascribing to Stoicism. They're completely wrong about it not having emotions in it at all.
Yeah, it's interesting because there's a there's a such a big difference between gap between looking at your behavior honestly and rejecting emotion. Like, you flying off the handle when you get angry, screaming, yelling, not appropriate. It is okay to be upset, to feel all of those feelings. It is not okay to be screaming and yelling and berating people, and so this feel from my interpretation of Stoicism, and I'd recommend anybody read Meditations by Marcus Aurelius, which was actually
Yeah.
just a journal of his. It was his diary, and that's something him and Anne Frank have in common. They had
Really?
diaries, and they were well read after.
Right. Can't have a private
Uh,
thought.
Twin flames, twin flames. Neither said publish it either.
Yeah,
Um,
right? But you're
but
you're coming exactly into the next part that I wanted to talk about, which is perfect. Passions, anxieties, and insecurities in Stoic thought, they're viewed as misguided reactions that ought to be controlled through self-disciplined practice, not suppressed, controlled. So the self-disciplined practice, it involves being able to detach yourself from the emotion and not allow it to rule your reaction, which is exactly what you were talking about. This is not the same as denying or suppressing your emotion. Detachment requires acknowledgement and internal investigation of your emotions and knowing how to remain clear eyed about your behavior in the face of those emotions. It is not about getting rid of them, it is about harnessing them and knowing how to react appropriately. So, there's a bunch of different things surrounding that, but that's the big collective piece that a lot of people just pretend isn't the most critical aspect of Stoic philosophy. I should talk a little bit about like the proposition stuff. So the proposition stuff, to get into my next point, I have to lean into some of these really confusing topics. And so I'm going to try and make this as not confusing as possible. So in Stoic logic, the smallest unit of Stoic logic was an assertable or an axiomata. So it's a proposition, which is either true or false, that affirms or denies. And this is all going to relate back to like controlling your emotions, I promise. So assertables have a truth value. They're only true or false depending on when it was expressed. So it's the assertable, it is night, will only be true if it is dark outside, if it is actually true that it's night. And that's the smallest unit of Stoic logic. It gets exponentially more complicated and annoying through there. Compound assertables, which can be built up from simple ones through the use of logical connections. So they examine choice and consequence. If then statements, either or statements, those are compound assertables. Assertables can also be distinguished by their modal properties. So whether they're possible, impossible, necessary, or non-necessary. That was a big part of Stoic logic. Chrysippus, our papa of Stoicism, He was a casual determinist, which meant that he thought that true causes inevitably give rise to their effects and that all things arise this way. And that's a very fancy, overrun way of saying two things can be true.
If you're gonna be a determinist, I think it's better to be a casual one anyway.
Oh, yeah, he absolutely. He is the big thing for him is like two things can be true. And I hear this a lot more on the internet than I used to. And that is actually true stoicism. You can both be angry and recognize that reacting out of anger is not the appropriate response. Those two things can be true. Just because you're calm doesn't mean you're not also angry. You can hold both things at once. And that's another fatal flaw in modern manosphere interpretation of stoicism. So, in Stoic logic, an argument is defined as a compound system of premises and a conclusion. And that is this internal investigation piece you're always doing. And this emotional control piece is always a system of premises and your conclusion. This is happening. I'm very upset about it. I'm feeling anger. In conclusion, it is not reasonable for me to react by punching this person in the face. That is not a reasonable reaction. So there's a bunch of other stuff that I can go into that is probably pedantic and mostly just things that I love. It's mostly about debating paradoxes and stuff. But no one really cares about that. I care about that, but nobody really
No,
cares.
I do care about that. We'll go into debating paradoxes someday, Sarah.
So I can make it really quick just from a Stoic perspective. The Stoic methods are debating paradoxes like creation of the universe and stuff. Like classical philosophy didn't just deal with how to live your life, but also how things exist. And that's the thing we don't really understand about ancient Hellenic and Roman philosophy and logic and these schools of philosophical thought. It's not just about how to live your life as a good person. It's also about how did we get here? Who are we? What do we come from? Is the earth round? Which is a topic for another day. So most people, when they think about Stoicism, though, they're not thinking about that. They're not thinking about axiomatas. They're not thinking about like determinism. They're thinking ethics when they talk about Stoicism. So that's really what I wanted to jump into next. The Stoics believed practice of virtue is enough to achieve that eudaimonia, that well-lived life. And the Stoics identified the path to achieving it with a life spent practicing their four cardinal virtues in every single day life. So prudence, fortitude, temperance, and justice, as well as living in accordance to nature. So technically the secret fifth thing. But the four things that they really focused on were that prudence, fortitude, temperance, and justice. So Stoics are especially known for teaching that virtue is the only good for human beings and that external things like health, wealth, and pleasure are not good or bad. They are just a material for virtue to act upon. So everything is neutral. You see this a lot in modern diet culture, actually, and follow my thread. People are like, a cookie is not morally good or bad. It is just a cookie. And what makes it good or bad is the ascription of our virtue that we enact upon that cookie. So if I'm like, I'm trying to lose weight, therefore that cookie is bad for me, I have ascribed that moral virtue onto that thing. But the cookie itself is completely neutral. It doesn't matter. The cookie is not one way or the other. So that I think is super interesting. You see Stoic logic in a lot of other things outside of gym bro culture. You see it in diet culture too, which are not the same thing, by the way. Diet culture
Yeah,
and gym culture are different. They're just interrelated. They hang out, they're friends, but they're
often
not the same thing.
unhealthy and toxic friends.
Yes, very unhealthy and toxic friends.
Yeah.
So the Stoics, and this is the emotional thing, I've kind of touched on it, but the Stoics also believed that certain destructive emotions like jealousy and anger and envy, which is not the same as jealousy. So they believe that those emotions result from errors of judgment. They're very internal about your reaction to things. Your emotional response is in your control. So people should aim to maintain a will that's in accordance with nature, which is starkly in contrast with the modern gym bro, pseudo-masculine red pill, iron pill that you should feel nothing ever. This is about experiencing those destructive emotions as an error in judgment. And an error in judgment demands introspection. It demands an introspective analysis and response to your feelings, not a pushing down. It demands you go inward and dissect why you feel that way and whether or not you can act in accordance with what is logical or outside of that emotion. Is that emotion governing your actions right now?
That makes sense. I think that it's really interesting the role of responsibility over your actions paired with acceptance of your emotions.
Mhm.
And if
It is
it
not
almost and it makes me think of, CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy, and that same perspective of there's like you're saying, there's a difference between suppression and engagement with something, and also putting the work to decide it to first assess if your actions are appropriate and then assess what is the preferred reaction that you'd rather be having so that you can try to create a plan to move in that direction and get your thoughts and your behaviors. Because if you can't get your thoughts in line, then you're not going to be able to get your behaviors in line.
Exactly, and I love to think about that stuff because mastering your emotions is not the same as suppressing your emotions. This is another critical error people make. Mastering says that you can feel everything fully, but you know how to stay cool-headed. You know how to react outside of that emotional pull. Suppressing and pretending that they exist is not mastering them. That is ignoring them, which is not the same. To master something is to fully know and fully understand it, not to pretend it's not there. When you master something, you know everything about it and you know how to navigate it. You don't pretend that it's off in the ether or I don't feel anything. It's not about pain. It's actually about full acknowledgement of the human experience. And you are spot on that it sounds a lot like CBT because it influenced the creation of CBT. So it is actually deeply, Stoicism is deeply a part of therapy. Therapy is rooted in Stoic principles. So all these weird red pill guys who are like, you don't need to go to therapy. You just need to not feel anything ever like a Stoic. They're totally wrong. If you want to actually practice Stoic principles, you have to actually engage in modern therapy practices.
Yeah, it's interesting how long humans have been trying to dissect the relationship between our thoughts and our behaviors and managing them in ways that improve the quality of our consciousness and of our lived experience.
Yes, and the Stoics actually outlined that our own actions and thoughts and reactions, all of those things are under our control. That is something that Stoics believed. And for the Stoics, this meant using reason and logic to understand the process of nature and the logos of universal reason inherent in all things means overcoming emotions. Overcoming is not suppression. And they refer to
Yeah.
these as passions, which I think is really great. So passions is they considered a passion a disturbing or misleading force in the mind, which occurs because of a failure to reason correctly. So when you're feeling something really strongly, it means you're either having an expectation that's being violated, you've created a story on your own, you're letting the emotion own you, you're not detaching from the emotion, and that's why you're feeling so strongly. But that is in your control. So the Stoics, they use this word to talk about a lot of common emotions like anger and fear, even excessive joy, which I think is really interesting. Incorrect judgment to present good. So when you're way too invested in a almost hedonistic approach to something in front of you, that gives rise to delight and like overjoy and things like that, which they view just as bad as something like lust or anger. Oh, envy. Yeah, I guess is another good one that we can talk about. So to be free of these passions and these really intense feelings, that was what would bring you happiness. And the Stoics believed that we have to measure things and see their real value and that passions are not the natural front things. Just because you're really excited about something doesn't mean that's the best thing. It means you are feeling very strongly about this and you need to take a step back and consider, is this something that's on the right path for me? Like you mentioned wanting to be the best version of yourself. You already are. You just have to make the choices that best version of yourself would already make. So when you're really excited about something, if you stop and think to yourself, hold on a minute, is this aligned with the path I want to take to becoming the best version of myself? How I feel the best version of myself would behave? That's that conversation piece. That excessive joy is just as misleading as the excessive anger, which I think is really interesting. Like good and bad. It's about balance and not being neutral, but not letting any one emotion either direction pull you completely that way, which I think is really
Yeah.
cool.
Creating some space between your feelings, your immediate thoughts, create some space from that and explore the thoughts and the emotions from another perspective, which it makes me I mean, I feel there's so many through lines when you talk about the nature of Stoicism and especially Stoic ethics between Taoism and the work of Lao Tzu and also some sects of Buddhism, and then also bringing it all the way up towards the modern era of psychoanalysis and just that ability to reflect upon your feelings is metacognition is something that if more people engaged with it, they'd find that a lot of healthy things can happen in the space between these strong feelings pulling you somewhere because it's you have sometimes I think of the human mind as a sailboat. And some people have bigger sails or smaller sails or bigger boat or smaller boat, and they're all unique in their own way for how you manage it and engage with it. But doesn't mean that there aren't principles that can help you in how you use that sailboat and engage with the winds that are coming at you. And some of us live in an environment with really strong emotional winds, or we have a huge sail on a tiny boat, and it's dragging you across the water. And rather than always being reactive to those winds, taking a beat, one breath. As someone who's been in some emergency situations in previous jobs where there's a crisis, taking just a single breath. Okay. And then saying, how do I want to react to this? Especially in intense emotional and even in positive emotional experiences. Somebody brings some awesome idea to you and they're like, I want to give you $1 million to make whatever app you dream of making. And
Yep.
take that breath. Yeah, it's very helpful.
It is, and that's exactly it, like, someone comes to you with, "I have the greatest idea to get rich." Your initial goal is to be like, "Oh my god, I'm so excited to get rich." But what you should be doing is when someone comes the logical, reasonable thing to do when someone does that is go, let me talk about your idea first. Let me hear what your idea is. So don't be governed by that initial gut reaction of like, I'm going to get rich tomorrow. Be governed by, okay, let's talk it through first. And it's all about that internal conversation. Most of our modern therapy is rooted in Stoic practices, detachment, the ability to release negative emotions, learning how to think clearly through strong feelings. That is modern therapy practices. And that's the actual meaning of Stoicism.
Nice. Well, thank you so much, Sarah. I thought I knew a lot about Stoicism, and it turned out all I knew about was Stoic ethics. So I really appreciate that.
Yeah, it's bigger
Yeah,
than that, Chris. It's bigger than that. Think big.
it's so much bigger. Think big. You inspired me. I want to do an episode on Epicureanism.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Sarah. You taught me something new today, and thank you to everyone who listened.
This has been You Sure About That? Hosted by Christopher Armitage and Sarah Smith. Production by Troy Hewitt. This is a program of the Existentialist Republic. Don't forget to like and subscribe and tell a friend. Learn more about the Existentialist Republic by visiting theexistentialistrepublic.com. Enjoy, won't you?